Direction of light. The direction of light is an incredibly powerful tool both for creating dimension in the scene as well as establishing the mood. Where is the light coming from in the frame? The direction of light is important because it dictates the direction of the highlights and the shadows. A light can be positioned in any direction around the subject. And for this reason, direction of light should be considered on an axis vertically, up and down, and also 360 degrees. The further the light is off axis to the camera, the more shadows are going to be visible. Now, if you have a light source that's very centered and very low, this reduces shadows, and this is called flat light. But if you have a light that's very high, very far off to the side or even behind the subject, this is referred to as dimensional light. Now, neither is right or wrong, but instead they're used to create different visual messages, lighting patterns. To help better discuss light and lighting setups, photographers often use terms, and these terms are used to describe patterns of shadows on a subject's face. Knowing these terms does not make you a better photographer at all. Instead, what it does is it helps you describe what you're seeing, or it helps me describe a certain pattern and then you be able to recreate it. Don't fixate on the definitions too much. They're mostly useful when you're trying to decode or describe light in a photograph. Let's go take a look at this in practice. Knowing this terminology does not make you a better photographer, but it's going to be really useful as you study other photographs to try to figure out how they're lit, or when you're trying to complete assignments with certain terms given to you in those quizzes, those practical applications. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cover this terminology, explain to you what you're looking for. The first thing I want you to keep in mind is that we're talking about the lighting patterns on the face. You're specifically looking at the patterns created by the nose and the chin. Now I'm going to be moving the light around the subject from side to side. The further the light is from the center of the subject's face, the more shadows that are created. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start in the first lighting position where the light is flatter. There are fewer shadows, and this is called paramount light. So let's take a look at this first lighting pattern. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to center my light, get nice and centered. And so what you'll see is the shadow underneath her chin as well as the shadow underneath her nose is nice and centered. Everything is really even. So this is called paramount lighting, and of course it's called that because of old Hollywood lighting, the Paramount movie studio. So let me grab a shot of what that looks like. Okay, now one of the things I do want you to notice is that the light that I'm using is on a boom arm. If you're ever trying to create paramount lighting with the subject facing directly towards camera, if you don't have a boom arm, you're going to struggle, because what happens is all of a sudden that light stand, this light stand right here, is going to be right in the middle of your shot. So I find boom arms to be extremely useful. It allows me to shoot wider in my frame and also be able to get that light centered when I want it to. If you check the gear guide, you're able to see the exact gear that I'm using here. Another name for paramount lighting is something called butterfly lighting. And what that is, it's when the shadow underneath the nose creates the shape of a butterfly. But if we look right here, I can barely see the shadow underneath the nose. So what I actually have to do to create that butterfly lighting effect is to raise the light up. So when I raise that light and keep it nice and centered, that's when you see the butterfly look. So let me grab a shot of that so you can see what I'm talking about. Once again, shadows are nice and even underneath the nose and the jawline. So this looks great. However, I'm going to pull it back and have it at a lower angle, so as I move the light around, we have constant height of light. So let me reset that one more time. Let's come back to here. So right about there, we'll use that as our paramount lighting. All the shadows nice and even. Let me get one more shot. Perfect. So this is paramount lighting. It is the flattest lighting position you're going to have, meaning when the light is lined up centered to the subject's face, everything's nice and even, there really aren't many shadows. The shadows are directly down, but they're not created from side to side. So this is the least dramatic, the least dimensional, the least sculptural of the lighting positions around the subject. So now we're going to add a little bit more shadow, a little bit more dimension by moving the light off to the side. So I'm going to move the light off to the side just a bit. And now what we have is something called loop lighting, and you can see that the name comes from the shadow cast by the nose. It creates a little bit of a loop. Now let me grab a shot of that so you can see it nice and close. right, so that loop shadow. Now there's actually different lengths of loop lighting. For example, if I move the light a little more centered, that's a very short loop. And if I move the light off really far, that's a really long loop. There's no right or wrong. There's not like an exact position for where the loop needs to fall. But as you can see, we've added more shadow to the side of the face opposite the main light. And so we've created a little bit more dimension, a little more sculpting, and a little bit more drama. Now the next lighting position is when we move the light even further off to the side. And as I do so, eventually, the shadow from the nose and the shadow of the cheek are going to meet to create a little triangle of light underneath the subject's eye. So, and there, right here. This is called Rembrandt lighting. And so you can actually see that triangle of light. The nose has met the shadow of the cheek. So Rembrandt lighting, of course, you've heard that name from the famous Dutch painter, and it's used all the time in more traditional portraiture. Now, one thing I want you to notice while we're here is something that I try to watch out for in my portraits is I don't love when there's that little highlight just to the side of the mouth. You can actually see it here. Let me take a shot so you know what I'm talking about. Now, for some of you, this may not be a big deal at all. And actually, this is a really subtle example of it. I feel like it tends to make somebody look a little heavier, kind of like their cheeks are thicker. So when I'm doing portraits, I do watch out for this and I try to close up that shadow, which can be from moving the light off the side just a little bit more. It actually makes the triangle a bit smaller, but it gets rid of that problem area. Sometimes it's also fixed by raising the light up. So I'm going to take a picture of this. Again, although the triangle is smaller, it is still Rembrandt light. And so I can keep moving the light further and further and further off to the side, and that triangle of light will get smaller and smaller and smaller, still called Rembrandt light, but eventually that triangle disappears and you have something called split light. Half of the side of the face will be in complete shadow, the other half will be completely lit. So let's move the light off to the side a little more. So about right there. And now, all shadow and it's lit. This is going to be the most dramatic of the lighting patterns. Okay, so half of the face you can see, half of it you can't. One of the things you want to be careful of if you try split lighting is a lot of times you'll get a really dark pocket of light in the eye. It will help to lower the light just a little bit. And I try to watch just for when I get that little highlight on the side of the face. So somewhere right here is still split light. Great. So as I've moved the light further and further and further off to the side, I've added more and more and more shadow and more and more and more drama. And none of that is right or wrong. All of the lighting patterns are completely equally valid. It depends on what you're trying to shoot. Are you trying to go for flatter and less shadows? Are you trying to create something with a lot of drama? It's up to you to decide what the purpose of the photo shoot is. So let's take a look at all of these lighting patterns one more time. All right, moving the light off to the front. Completely centered to the face, underneath the nose. That shadow's nice and even. Underneath the jawline, shadow's nice and even. Paramount light, if I raise it up a little bit, it's called butterfly lighting. And as soon as I see a little bit of a shadow to the side of the nose, that is called loop lighting. And it's called loop lighting all the way over here. It keeps being a loop, long, long loop, until the shadow of the nose meets the cheek, which then this is called Rembrandt lighting, the Rembrandt triangle. And as I move the light off to the side, it stays Rembrandt, 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 until that triangle disappears, and now that is called split light. What we've taken a look at here are the lighting patterns on the face and the terminology associated with the lighting patterns. Specifically, it's the patterns of the shadows. But what you should be aware of is that even if your subject moves, they turn from side to side, you're not judging it based on the position of the light. It's not like if I'm centered and the light is off to the right, it's automatically split light or Rembrandt light. What you're actually looking at is the pattern of the shadows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my subject. I'm going to rotate my subject to the side, and all of a sudden you'll see it's all about relativity. Because when I move the subject to face the light, no longer is that subject in split light, but I can make them be in paramount lighting. So let's take a look at this. I'm gonna rotate my mannequin here all the way to the side, and suddenly she is in paramount again. Because if you look, there's no shadows cast to the side of her nose. It's nice and centered. But the shot looks a lot different than paramount straight on. Because when you're photographing somebody in paramount position straight on, the shadows are falling back away from the camera so you can't see it. But in this situation, when she turns to the side, when I move my subject to the side in paramount, still have those even shadows, well, now the shadows falling away on the back of the head are visible. So you see more shadows, so the image becomes more dramatic. So now what I can do is I can actually create all of those same lighting patterns, but with my subject turned in a different position. So let me take photos of those and I'll show you how now that the subject's turned, the image is even more dramatic because I can see more shadows. So let's take a shot real quick here. So you got a little bit of paramount, nice and even shadows underneath the chin and nose. Then we'll move it off to the side, and we've got some loop light here. And then even further off to the side, we're going to get Rembrandt light right here. Great. Let me just move this. Rembrandt light. And then eventually all the way till split light. When my subject's turned to the side, the split light is actually going to look like a rim light. There's going to be no light on the front side of the subject's face. All you'll see is the carving out of their profile. We've explored the patterns of light on a subject's face when the subject is facing straight onto camera, but these lighting patterns are true no matter what direction the subject is facing. Like if the light creates a loop shadow on the side of the nose, it's still loop light even if the subject is facing completely in profile. These lighting patterns are relative to the subject's face, not to the camera. So when we describe these different lighting patterns, it's based on the shadow, not based on some relative camera to light position. So this is a good opportunity to introduce two more terms: short light and broad light.